Hello, Craig. A huge welcome back to the show after, I don't know how many years. It's a good few, isn't it?
It's been a while. It's good to speak with you again.
Yeah, really good, really good. I've forgotten how yummy your accent is, and I'm just like bathing in it. I know listeners are going to absolutely love listening to you.
I'll try to speak slowly so I'm not misunderstood. So.
No, you're perfectly clear. So I want to share a little bit of a kind of like backstory as to how we've ended up talking about this particular topic today. And so listeners may remember you've been on the show, I think, is it twice before? We've known each other now for a good many years, and so you've been on the show before, and we're connected on social media and things, and I saw a post that you wrote that I was just like, oh, what a gorgeous expression of something that is just being played out everywhere at the moment, this idea of like toxic masculinity versus healthy masculinity. And because of your about to combine work and life into lurk and wife, because of your lurk and wife, you have a particularly aligned way of being in this inquiry that works so fits so well with the work that we're doing here at Waking the Wild. So I was just like, oh, wonderful. Yeah, I would love to delve into that further with Craig. So that's what's brought us here to this conversation.
Wonderful.
What I would love to know is what's brought you here to being in this inquiry about healthy masculinity. How did you end up with that being something that's important to you?
That's I believe that the post I made referenced Robert Bly's book Iron John, and a quote in that book, something to the effect of the things that men were once known for are no longer needed or no longer required, I believe. And that just got me to asking the question, well, what are the things that men have been known for, and are those good things? Are those healthy things? And why aren't they required any longer? And what is required of men? If those things, those traditional things that culture has looked to men for are no longer needed, then what does it mean to be healthy in today's society? And the lens that I see all these things through is the lens of the human rewilding movement, which is many things, of course, but that's the approach that I take. So I'm not a psychiatrist or a expert in the field, other than that's the lens that I see these topics through. And so I guess that's my unique perspective on these things.
And at what point would you say, I'm guessing that you writing that post wasn't the beginning of that inquiry for you personally? Where would you say that you started to journey with this sense of like, what does it mean for me to be a man in this world? When did that start to occur to you?
That I think probably several years ago, as I've just noticed over the years that men in general, at least in my context, are very disconnected from each other, from what it means to be, gathered together with other men. There just aren't many groups that seem to be healthy groups for men to express manhood in a healthy way. And I began to ask the question why, and how can we address that? And I haven't really answered that question, but just seeing the lack of opportunities for men to grow from each other, I think, has been part of the problem, part of what I've been trying to address in my own life.
Yes, yeah, very much so. So going back to Iron John and what Bly was saying about that kind of like what men were, how did you name it, how you said it?
I think something to the effect of the things that men were once known for are no longer required.
Wonderful. So how about we start with like, what are those things? As far as, you don't necessarily have to be like question what it was that Bly meant, but like for you,
Certainly.
what do you see as like being those things that men were known for?
I think culturally or ancestrally, the whole issue of gender roles, of course, is a very loaded one and a very difficult one to address. But I think in terms of what many cultures have seen men provide, has been at least what I saw a lot of women addressing that question that I asked in that post was that partnership and respect for women and asking the right questions and learning through mistakes and leading through passion and not dogma and things of that nature. I think those are the things, but of course also the hard skills, the hunting and the creating and the things of that nature, protecting, I suppose, to some degree, and things of that nature, I think have been traditionally and ancestrally delegated to the role of men.
So. And I think it's helpful to say these are some of the things that we're talking about here have become sensitive topics, and that's not such a bad thing. It's because people have had life experiences that are one way or another impacted by all of the things we're talking about here. And my sense is the way forward is to be able to talk about them, like to acknowledge this is how things were, this is how things are, we're in the work of kind of creating what's next. And part of that is to be able to speak honestly about these things, like not try and pretend that things weren't as they were, but equally not be too simplistic about it as well, to recognize these things are rarely as binary as like men did this, women did that, but let's not also pretend there weren't differences typically seen in those roles. So coming back to what you were saying there about I think you called it hard skills. What I would like to explore is the way the hard skills are also almost like embodied soft skills, if that makes sense, as in the doing of what we're calling hard skills. Within that are other skills that we could kind of, if we're going down a level, are kind of like we could say like energetically or emotionally are something else. And it feels to me that it's where our overall way of life has changed, which is clearly causing other issues, but let's again specifically talking about men. If we were saying, okay, so we're just going to take away the need for men to hunt, let's say, it's recognizing like what are we losing in taking away that role from men that actually would still be beneficial. That's what I'm interested in looking at. So what occurs to you as I ask that? Because I think for me, it isn't as straightforward as like hard skills and soft skills. It really is all one when we look at it like what's actually going on underneath the hood, as it were.
Exactly. That's very well put, because you're absolutely right. With the hard skill of hunting, traditionally came also the soft skills of teaching younger generations about the environment and our place in the environment, and gratitude and appreciation for food and the gathering of food and connection to those who have come before us, human and non-human. So all of those softer skills, I suppose, are certainly tied up in that hard skill of hunting. It's not just about putting food on the table. It's about learning your place in the environment and how you're a part of that connected whole. So we lose that. So.
Wow.
And I think a lot of children, but in particular boys, have been raised without that awareness, and so that disconnection from seeing one's place in the natural order has been lost, along with the hard skill of hunting, as it was practiced in previous generations.
There's something in the way that you've said that's allowed me to see something perhaps at a deeper level than I've seen before. And again, particularly when it comes to men and how men have become conditioned and kind of lost connection with their kind of wild self, let's say. There's something, what was just occurring to me, I don't necessarily know this is right, but it was just what was appearing as you were saying that, is how because women are inherently, you know, there isn't a way of opting out of being the one that carries the baby, gives birth, you know, there are then sometimes choices made, like, for example, not to breastfeed or not to have that sort of deep contact. But to a large extent, women retain much of that. Women who are mothers retain much of that. And so I know for me, talking personally, it was having children that began me recognizing I did have these like deep instincts of what was the right thing to do. And they were speaking much louder than they had before, because they were very specific. They were very important and specific about how I'd parent that was different to what I was seeing happening out there. And so for me, there was this just like almost spontaneous, embodied return to that connection to my wild self, which you could then say is like then starts to be the connection to other things around me, you know, to my family, to the land, is kind of ultimately where it led me. And I suddenly realized, like, that isn't the same for men.
That's a good point. You're right. There isn't that opportunity, I think, as broadly available for men to reach into those deeper, more primal instincts that are still latent and existing in men. And so you're right. There doesn't seem to be that opportunity to call those forth, as there often is with women, like you express. And I think that's definitely a part of the problem. That goes to, I think, a lack of community that men experience. There isn't that opportunity for, the rituals that men have gone through, the life stage rituals that many men have experienced in previous cultures were designed to call that out of men, call that forward in men, and that we have lost that. So I think that's a big part of why men don't know who they are anymore.
Yeah. I have a feeling it's like just real mix of kind of like grief and compassion in a different way than I have before. So looking at it again from this lens of the hard skills are a kind of embodied practical way of expressing the soft skills. In your experience, do we need something of that kind? Like, do men need some form of hard skill in order to reclaim something deeper, or is there a different way of doing that?
I think, as I have personally practiced the hard skills, it has opened up just vastly deeper levels of understanding of what generations, male, female, whatever, have gone through before me. For example, learning how to nap arrowheads and points out of stone. I'm not very good at it, but what little I've done, I've gained an incredibly deep appreciation for those people in the past who had to literally create, tools out of whatever materials they found in nature. And that in turn has led to a deeper appreciation for the cultures they came from, and the stories they passed, and the rituals they experienced. And so for me, practicing the hard skills is about much more than just gaining the skill. It's about gaining a deeper connection to those who've gone before me, and that helps me to know who I am. So I think they go hand in hand. The hard skills are just a gateway to self-understanding and cultural understanding.
Yeah, I love that. What I'm wondering is how is it feels to me there's, even with that very intentional reclamation of those skills and the deep benefits that brings that you're describing there, it still feels there's then potentially, and this is a question I don't know necessarily the answer, but it feels potentially there's still a gap between going back to Bly's quote of what men were known for. And for me, there is like that word known. It's more than known. It's like valued for, respected for, needed for, loved for, even, without meaning that to be in a transactional sense. But it's like there's more than them just being known for that. And so in this world where those skills you're talking about aren't needed in the same way, it feels to me the potential there's that gap to be bridged, as in the reclamation of those skills, it doesn't necessarily bring that same sense of, therefore the man is then known for that in the same way as he would have been.
That's very true. You're right. And there's also the added issue of the fact that simply learning those skills isn't available to many people.
Yes.
There are many disadvantaged communities that just don't have the opportunity to learn those things. So it can't be just say all men need to learn these things, because that isn't necessarily possible. So you're absolutely right. It's not about just lifting out a set of skills and understandings from the past and transporting them to the present. We have to understand what that means in today's culture and how that can be expressed in various ways.
Yes,
and I don't know that I have the
it's
answer
a different context. Yes, totally. Yeah. And again, I'm not I think this in some ways is I think all of us that are in this work, in quote marks, more broadly, I think this is the ongoing inquiry for all of us, isn't it? It's like the context is different.
Yes.
The context we're in is different. And I was writing something about the rebirth that we've just been through, from primal happiness to waking the wild. And I was talking about, so much of our work is based on ancient ways, but we are in a modern world. And the way that I ended up wording it was ancient ways alchemized for modern days, because it's the alchemization, and not that, again, this is an ongoing inquiry. It's not like the alchemization's been done. This is the ongoing alchemy, the ongoing inquiry. Like, how do we bring those, what's our birthright, it seems, how do we bring that back, but in a way that is contextual, that is of benefit? It's not just us playing at this is not at all meant in an offensive, it's not at all meant as in like any sort of sense of dismissing, but not just running around playing at being a hunter.
Right.
Like, how do we reclaim those skills in a way that has some meaning, some deep synergy with our context, if the context isn't going to change anytime soon?
I agree. That I think that there is a danger of, as you say, trying to just simply pretend we live in a previous generation when we don't. And what does that mean in today's world? And I guess using the example that we've already used about hunting, the providing of food was simply the end result of that chain of understanding of who we are in the environment. So it may be a modern way of understanding that issue is, however we gain food today from the supermarket or wherever else, understanding where that food comes from, and teaching ourselves and teaching our children and teaching our culture to appreciate the process and to support and encourage the processes that are respectful of the animal and the environment that the animal came from. And I think seeing the soft skills that are connected to that ancestral harder skill is possibly what we need to focus on as men and as humans in today's world, because you're right, we can't go back to the past. So what did we lose from the past that we can bring into the present?
I really love that. So there is just something so delightfully paradoxical here. It's in reclaiming the hard skills, we also reclaim the soft skills. And then we would use those soft skills in a way that makes sense according to the context.
Exactly. I believe that's possibly where we need how we can contextualize the same valued skills for men and women in today's world, and not lose the connection to the past.
Yes, I love that. I love that so much. So we've given the example, and maybe this is the right one to focus on, but I'd be interested to see if there's another one that'd be really useful to explore. So you've given the example of hunting and how, and in fact, actually, before I go there, I would love to know some practical ways, and it may be that you talk personally, because I know that you're not talking theoretically with much of this. These are things that are your lived experience. What you were just talking about, bringing those soft skills to kind of like looking at how we can put food on the table in a way that is healthier for all concerned. Would you give some examples of ways that you personally are doing that? How does that look in your life?
One practice that I've tried to lead my son to do and to teach myself to do is to just be aware of the particular piece of earth that we live on. I'm not a large landowner by any means, but the small plot of land that we do have and that we do steward, we've made an intention of trying to list and be aware of every species, plant, animal, fungi, whatever, that lives on that plot of land. And I've been amazed on just a small section of land, the vast array of species that are found there. 15 to 20 different species of mushrooms and edible and medicinal. And it's amazing what you can learn about where you are in the world just by looking literally beneath your feet. So that's been an intentional practice to just be aware of the land that I live on and how I'm a part of that, and not just live here and go to work every day.
I love that. And is it like a deeper level? Like when you first said that, I was like, yeah, I have that awareness. And I'm like, no, what you're talking about is an even deeper, more intentional level of awareness. Yeah, really love that. Really practical suggestion.
That's been the hope, at least. And as I say, every time we venture into the woods, I find a new species that I wasn't aware of lived on this piece of land. So it's caused me to live intentionally and to live observantly, and to realize how deep the life is in the place where I live.
Yeah, I love that. There's a robins just come to eat from a feeder at my window just then as we were talking. And more specifically, when it comes to putting food on your table, would you give another example of how, say for example, what decisions you might make differently to bring that food onto the table?
I think, of course, the issue of diet is also a very can be a touchy one, but also is a very important issue. However one chooses to eat, whether it's as an omnivore or as a carnivore or as an herbivore, whatever one chooses to eat, simply being aware of the process that brought that food to you. And something we try to do is to intentionally support growers in the area who are growing food, and whether it's plant or animal, in ethical ways and sustainable ways, and trying to support that effort. It can often cost more, it can often be less available, but if you're intentional about supporting that process, those maybe are the kinds of sacrifices we need to make, and to be aware of our own consumer habits, and to support those habits that are part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Yeah, there was something, as you said that, I think you said the word cost more, and what just came to me, and there's certainly what I'm about to say could definitely be seen as like I'm just saying this from a privileged position of being able to, for example, that not be an issue. I'm really what I was hearing is something deeper, more energetic about the way that we in a more modern world associate cost as a bad thing. And in like cost should be avoided at all costs. And certainly, what came into my awareness was I recorded an episode a month or two ago with my shamanic teacher, Jez Hughes, and the whole episode was about making offerings. Which was delightful in itself, like, can we really speak about making offerings for a whole 45 minutes? And actually we could have gone on and on and on. There was so much there. And as I'm sure you know, that it's more than like it's one a great example of that kind of practical action, but what that embodies is something so much deeper. And in that action of making an offering, there's something very different in terms of the relationship we have with the earth, with other beings. And it's a completely different mindset, because of course you are intending, you're giving things away. You're not avoiding cost at all costs. And as you just said that, I was like, oh, of course, again, this comes back to this modern mindset of we don't want things to cost, rather than recognizing like it's all an offering.
Exactly. And in focusing only on the monetary cost and trying to reduce that, what else has what has been the greater cost of a loss of culture,
Yes.
a loss of the health of the earth. So absolutely, and the act of
Mm.
intentional self-giving, whether it's the giving of an item or whatever it might be that we're giving, even if it's the giving the sacrifice of convenience and
Yes, the convenience
whatever.
is one of the I was really thinking of. Yes.
Certainly,
Yeah.
that is
Mm.
that is a powerful act of self-giving that can really change your mindset. So I think you're absolutely right. We have to ask, what is the greater cost? Is it that we're willing to pay? Is it monetary, or
Yeah.
is it some greater cost that we've already paid and lost?
Yeah. It's there's so much here. So is there another hard skill that you feel could be useful to take? We just talked about hunting, which I think in some ways actually includes a lot of other skills as part of it. But is there another skill that men were known for that would be useful for us to examine?
For me personally, creating fire is a very powerful act, and of course, and I think in many traditional cultures, creating and tending and maintaining fire was often seen as a role for women.
Mm.
But the gathering of firewood there was often a partnership in that, certainly. But for me personally, just the act of creating fire is much more than just about burning wood. It's about understanding, the self-giving of the earth and through the act of fire. It's that
Mm.
alchemical point at which something transforms into something else. And what does that teach me about when I give, and how are my gifts transformed into heat and light for the culture around me? So just the meditative act of creating fire and learning how fire speaks and what it asks for. Is it asking for more oxygen or more heat or more fuel? Entering into a conversation with fire as you create it opens up a conversation within the individual, or at least within me personally, about what is it that I need, what kind of fuel or breathing space or heat do I need in my life to be able to give heat and light to the world around me. So that,
Mm.
again, a hard skill of creating fire is much more than just that. It's about helping myself to ask those questions about what makes me burn in the proper way.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. And you're right. I think that's one example where um it's one for all of us. And speaking personally, there's in fact, my very first shamanic initiation was a fire initiation.
Mm.
And it was because of the level of intentionality, it allowed me to experience fire in a way that I hadn't before. And at the kind of mundane level, like a real deep appreciation for the light and the warmth and the protection of it, in a way that I just hadn't experienced before. Before it had been seen much more something like that was like pleasurable and beautiful, but didn't have that deep sense of like, oh wow, it's an ally. It's a real ally to me. But as you say, there's so much in that as we relate to it. I'm going to say use different words to what you've done, but I think it's a similar thing. Like the more I became intimate with the spirit of fire, the more I was able to see like that relationship between me and it, but also within me. And there is something again that is so deep within us, like that primal relationship that humans have with fire is almost, not quite, almost as old as humans.
Absolutely, and there is something much more than just that chemical process that's taking place.
Mm.
I've been on camping trips with people who were cold and wet and miserable and set up camp, and they just no one seems to be in a good mood. But once the fire is built, the entire mood changes. There's a,
Yes.
a literal gathering
Mm.
point. And even teenagers today who are often criticized for doing nothing but staring at screens, if you get them around a campfire, they'll stare at the fire because that's what
Yes.
we're ancestrally geared for. There is
Mm.
something very powerful in that, and that has a lot to
Mm.
teach us about who we are as humans. And you're right, that deep ancestral connection to fire.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love that. So the time's flying by, it really is. But this just, the whole conversation has taken it turns in places I really wasn't expecting, which is just delightful. So I feel like it would be useful now to come back up again to what you were talking about in your post, and this kind of comparison, and I think you use these words, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think you were talking about, this idea of toxic masculinity versus healthy masculinity, and we've been talking a bit about I guess ways to reclaim healthy masculinity, and also define again within this context what that might be. So I guess looking at it again from this lens of toxic masculinity, what do you see is happening there? Like what is creating what we're then looking at on the outside and calling toxic masculinity? What is that?
Yes, and again, I'm no expert, but what I've seen in so many of the examples of toxic masculinity that we've seen rightly called out and held up to the public view is men who don't know who they are, and they're trying to act out some form of, I guess, what they perceive as being masculine, but which is done in such hurtful and damaging and toxic ways. And I think that is the beginning point, just a disconnection from self. Men don't know who they are anymore in many ways, in many examples. And that comes from a deeper disconnection from community. Men try to be islands, and they try to live independently from the world around them, and that disconnects them from any sense of community. And with that disconnection comes from a disconnection from accountability. Men don't hold each other accountable anymore, and that's the deeper disconnection from culture. Just who are we as people and as humans, and that comes from a deeper disconnection from land and nature and reality itself. So all that chain of causation from disconnection from land and culture and community and self leads to these very unhealthy ways that some men act out a false image of what manhood looks like.
It's which then, as you say, understandably is called out and made wrong.
Yes.
And yet I think so often the cause of that isn't seen, the real sadness that's there.
And unfortunately, often there's not a redemption path either. Obviously toxic behaviors need to be called out, but then what? How do we repair this in that individual and in our culture? I think that there has to be a path forward, not just, an accusation path.
Yeah, it really, as it stands right now, what's typically happening is the behaviors made wrong as if the context of this modern culture is correct, rather than recognizing, most of us are a product of our culture, and it's the what we're calling toxic masculinity is literally just a reflection of what's toxic in our culture.
Exactly. The quote is true. The mass of men really do lead lives of quiet desperation. And we have to ask, why are men desperate? Why not just don't behave that way, but what is causing you to behave that way? And I think there's a series of questions that men individually and communally need to be asking themselves about that. First of all, who am I? A deeper understanding of who I am as an individual through meditation and study and reflection. And where am I? The bioregion that I live in and the land that I live on, as I was talking about earlier. I think that understanding can bring us into a deeper connection to the next question of where I am, and where I am culturally. What is my calling? What is my gifting? What is my practice in this world? How can I use that? And then to whom do I belong? What is my community and my responsibility in this community and my purpose and the rites of passage that can help me to get to that point? So all those questions, I think, need to be asked, again, both individually and communally.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, everything starts with self. So it starts individually, but it absolutely is a question for our culture and for all of us. So something I'm wondering, and is that every part of this conversation, is a whole conversation itself, and is kind of, there's so much that we aren't able to say, and we're kind of skipping over big questions that probably do, warrant being asked, but just within the context we don't have time for that. But something that just was occurring to me is how culturally there is this sense, and it's not always necessarily spoken this way, but almost that toxic masculinity becomes a kind of longhand for masculinity, as in masculinity is inherently toxic and would be better off without it. Men would be better without it. And it seems to me that that's not the case. It is about recognizing what actually is healthy and needed, and men reclaiming that, culturally reclaiming that.
Yes.
But I'd love to know your thoughts, as opposed to, it's kind of like, if we're saying let's like down with toxic masculinity, like what are we saying is the answer? Like, what's the way forward? And again, it seems to me it is about having this relationship to healthy masculinity. But I would just love your sense of it, like that every time you're answering, that it's allowing me to see something different. So I'd just love to have your sense of that.
You're right. It is easy to say, well, the problem is the patriarchy, but the fact is there have been healthy patriarchal cultures, just as there have been healthy matriarchal cultures throughout history. So what is it within those various societal constructs? What is it that allows men to act in healthy ways? And you're right. It's not just that the whole concept of masculinity needs to be done away with. It needs to be reshaped and reformed in a healthy way. And I don't know that I have the answers, but I think just asking those questions of why are men so disconnected? I see men, many of the responses that I've seen in some men to this, the current culture of the Me Too culture and so forth. There's been some that are just critics of the whole movement. Well, boys will be boys, and this is just an overly woke culture's response, and that's not healthy. Then there's been those men who have suddenly risen up and tried to present themselves as allies and white knights, and that can be just as toxic in some ways as the other extreme. Then there's men who just complain and say, well, I can't even pay a compliment to a woman anymore, without really asking the question, well, what is in that compliment that the woman hears as a threat or an attack or something? So I think a lot of those inwardly directed questions that men aren't asking themselves need to be asked. So to lead to the greater question of what is it about a current expression of masculinity that is toxic, and how can we avoid that?
And it feels to me that this is a question for all of us too. Like, yes, it's a question for men, and it very much, and again, this is me speaking personally, this is an ongoing question for me, or these are ongoing questions for me too. It's in the example of the compliment that you gave, as if you just gave me a compliment. I just realized that I was about to say that. In the example you gave of a compliment, there's absolutely questions for men, as in, what's being heard, what's being interpreted as a threat. And then also for women who are on the receiving end, it's for us to recognize the way that we have fear and closure that isn't the reality. The man isn't a threat, the compliment isn't a threat, and these are places that are shining a light on where we've become disconnected from ourselves, from the land, from men, from our community.
That's an excellent point, and that's a point at which I think we can learn from each other. Certainly, I think many men I know just simply aren't even aware of the daily threats and daily issues that many women face just walking down the street, and we can learn from women about those issues, and I think we can learn from each other about what is the male intentionality behind giving a compliment. Men need to ask themselves that question, and maybe we can better express ourselves in that to help women to not feel threatened. I don't know if that may be overly simplistic, but definitely I think there is much to be learned across. We can cross fertilize certainly our own understanding between men and women.
There's I think, as ever, just us being able to bring awareness and love to these conversations. I think there can be so much shame, you know, like it's just inherently wrong for a man to do that, rather than be able to kind of like curiously look at what's actually taking place. You know, why is that happening?
Yeah.
This just called to mind. I saw a post on Facebook a few weeks ago where someone had posted something like, it was about how men, this is a stereotype, but like men say to women, you know, it's not that bad, smile, or something like that, basically like asking the woman to smile. And it was so interesting because there was kind of two separate like directions this went in. One, which was women saying how much they dislike it and how they receive it and why it's not a great thing for men to say it. And then it was really interesting because the person who posted that then asked men, when you do that, what is your intention? Why are you doing that? And it was really interesting. You know, there's a lot of men just saying like, oh, I don't do that because it's a bad thing. But there's some men being really honest and saying, oh, well, you know, I do it from a place of, you know, wanting to connect. I do it from a place of actually just wanting to like bring a smile to her face. And you could really feel there was like real, you know, beautiful intention behind it that was just being completely misread and actually read as a threat. And the whole thing was just so illuminating. Like when these conversations we had, honestly, the things are revealed that no one would have expected on any side. So it more and more I see there is so much good intention behind things that are perceived as being something completely other than that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. And I think in that particular example, I think men maybe don't realize why they're asking that question. And, you know, I think for some men, it's because when I see a woman not smiling, I perceive that as her feeling threatened, and I don't want her to feel threatened. So so I think there is asking those deeper questions of why is this question being asked can be very healthy. And you're right. I think in general, most people don't have, you know, negative intentions, but aren't, maybe at least in the case with men, aren't even aware of what their own intentions are. So asking those questions is important.
Yeah. I want to, we're almost up on time, and I want to end on something you mentioned right at the beginning. And I noticed this too. You asked a question on that post that prompted us being here having this conversation. You asked something like, you know, what is it that, I'm going to paraphrase here, but almost like, you know, what is it that women do know men for, appreciating men or appreciate aspects of masculinity? You asked something of that nature, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And I love the responses because many of them went back to some of those more, I guess, deeper ancestral traits of men that maybe aren't highlighted, aren't you know, haven't been celebrated, like having partnership with and respect for women, and asking the right questions and not being ashamed of not knowing the answers, and leadership through passion and not dogma, and owning our mistakes. And I think if men could see that humility is an act of strength. I think that's what I heard in a lot of the comments from women, was that humility in men is not seen as a weakness, it's seen as a strength. And if men can learn that, I think we will be much healthier and be able to ask better questions of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. And I know that there were answers that we could see as like being, you know, stereotypical and therefore wrong, like protection, like provision. And yet I could feel that, you know, the deep truth in those, you know, perhaps the way that a man may well still be known for those skills has changed, but they are still things that are needed and are valued and are appreciated.
Very true. I think you're right. In today's culture, most men aren't called on to take up weapons and protect their families from enemies or from, you know, predators or whatever. But leadership can take a form in today's culture that is you know, leadership through humility, and or leadership through asking the right questions, or those types of things that that some of the comments led to. So leadership, you're right, seeing that just as a skill designated to men that needs to be tossed away, I think that's missing the point. It's how does that translate into today's culture? If a man is called to be a leader, what does that look like? And what does leadership, how is that embodied today in the same spirit, but not in the same technique as the past, possibly?
Yeah. Oh, this has been such a gorgeous conversation, and one of those ones again where I've got the opportunity to see and feel things at a level of depth that I hadn't before. So really, thank you so much.
Thank you for offering this opportunity. This has been wonderful and a learning experience for me, certainly.
Again, you know, just like the beauty and power of being able to talk about these things and what's revealed in the process. And so if listeners would like to find out more about you and what you do, and I know that you don't necessarily you know, put yourself out here as a kind of, you know, this is my body of work, and yet you do share such beautiful things and you know, inspiring and practical ways that we can get to know ourselves and reclaim our wildness. So where can people find out more about you?
You're right. I don't have a much of a public presence. I'm on Facebook, and that's probably where I post most of my thoughts and reflections. So that's probably the most opportune way to connect with me. I certainly would love to talk with anyone who would like to carry on this conversation, or others.
Wonderful. And that's just, we'll make sure we add the links to the show notes, but it's you're just Craig Richardson.
Yes, that's right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Craig. I'm really glad we did this, and I'm sure we'll be back again in a year or two's time having another conversation. But for now, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you again. It's been great.